Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be covering another interview coming out of PAX East, this time from Twinfinite.net. Now I've got a lot of the stuff cropped off on the sides from the actual article, but there's a lot of ads on the website, so if you're someone who's a little bothered by those, just keep that in mind. But I will include a link in the description of the video. Now, there's a few interesting points on this. Some of these topics have been beaten to death a little bit, but look, we'll take anything regarding Stormblood or the new jobs or anything at this point. So there are a few exciting things I figured it was worth at least making a video about. First question is about the diadem. Yoshi-P has pretty much the same response. The things they were going for, making sure there was a clear-cut goal, at least for the first half. After you've completed the clear-cut goal, you can leave or you can stay and grind out different enemies or gather or whatever it is that you want to do. The second half is really open-ended on what it is you're actually allowed to do, and there's no problem with people leaving after they've completed the objective that they actually queued up for. That being said, the emergency missions, I don't know, he doesn't really tell us how he feels about it, but he absolutely says everyone from the zone needs to participate if you realistically want to stand a chance against it. It's a nice almost surprise or raid type element, and he's wondering how players will enjoy it. How they enjoy it really is up to them. And that's talking about the entire second half if people even want to participate in things such as the emergency missions. I won't interject my thoughts into that. I feel like I could do that in a whole separate video. So let's just move on to the next question. Then they start talking about different story elements, how Heavensward kind of began on a depressing note, and how the next one, yes, there is going to be sort of a quiet beginning, but it's going to explode in ways that they hope the players look forward to. As for the storyline itself and for, how satisfying the beginning of Heavensward was, they asked if there's going to be as satisfying a moment. You know, when you first step foot into Ishgard, those who played 1.0, everyone who even played 2.0, there's a super satisfying feeling of when you first go past the gates of judgment. And will there be that sort of feeling going into Stormblood? And it's a very different feeling because with Ishgard, you get to Ishgard and there's all this mystery. You just kind of, you know what you kind of need to do, but you don't really know what's going to happen when you get in there. With Stormblood, however, you have a mission. You know what your objective is. You're reclaiming freedom for the areas that are involved, Alamigo and Doma. So it's a much different narrative. So hopefully this is just as exciting, but it's not exciting in a way that feels exactly like Ishgard. It feels exciting in its own unique way, which is something that's good to hear because Heavensward's story was fantastic. Even through the smaller patches, it kept me on my toes. So I'm hoping that Stormblood has an equally explosive launch story. Going into the jobs themselves, they talk about a little bit why they decided on Samurai and Red Mage. Samurai, they've known, and we've known this. They said originally Samurai was going to be a tank for Heavensward, but they went with Dark Knight because it was more thematically appropriate to Ishgard. As for Samurai, they had Final Fantasy XI in their mind. They know a lot of people who want Samurai are Final Fantasy XI players, and so they wanted it to be a DPS, so Yoshi-P wanted it to be a DPS. They ultimately decided, for that reason, it should be a melee DPS. As for Red Mage, they had to spend a ridiculous amount of time talking about it. They didn't know that they need to create a brand new role for it. Was it going to be a DPS? They even said at one point it may have been a healer. But no matter what, he knew that people were going to have an idea of what Red Mage is, the jack of all trades, master of none, but that it would probably not capture exactly what anybody was thinking Red Mage was going to be. It was going to be their own unique interpretation of the job itself. As for introducing 2 new jobs, they knew they wanted to do 2 new jobs. They knew they wanted to implement new DPS, so that's what they went with, and they said that making Red Mage fit was really just their top priority. Samurai was always going to fit, and making Red Mage fit was actually a much different thing. There's other existing jobs in the franchise that they considered, but they landed on those 2. He wouldn't comment exactly on what the other jobs he was contemplating were. One of them he mentions here was actually an Omiyuji, which is something like Oracle from Final Fantasy Tactics. But they said that going with Red Mage, it was just so much more anticipated. It made so much more sense. So they moved forward with Red Mage itself. As for having Samurai and Red Mage now out, because they were like 2 of the most highly anticipated jobs, like in all of Final Fantasy and in Final Fantasy XIV in particular, now that they are releasing those, the pressure is off them to get them out. Obviously, there's still pressure on for things like Blue Mage, but they may be able to exercise a bit more freedom. And in 5.0, we may even see a completely original job for Final Fantasy XIV, something that I think a lot of us kind of expected at some point. They've been doing the unique primals and anything that's unique to a Final Fantasy game that you can look back to a Final Fantasy game and go, wow, that Final Fantasy game had that and nothing else had it. That's a good feeling to have. It's something that makes your Final Fantasy game stand out while also standing right alongside all the same ones. I'm an advocate for a completely original job. However, I think it was important to get some of the heavy hitters like Red Mage and Samurai, and I still think Blue Mage is one of those heavy hitters as well that we probably need to see before we can actually get an original job. As for another comment regarding it's 2 DPS, same thing. We have data that suggests that it's not going to be that bad. He specifically mentions that, you know, it's not entirely about just making a new tank and making a new healer for the sake of queues, because that seems to be the #1 complaint. People are worried about queue times. There are plenty of tanks and healers out there that aren't only worried about that. They just wanted a new job to play because it's their role and it would be cool. But he says that maintaining the balance of the existing 3 tanks and the existing 3 healers is of more importance than releasing a new one and then having the balance be even more difficult. And you know what? I kind of respect that, but that's just going to happen. You're a game where the average level of content, or not the average level, but the hardcore content where most people begin to really even care about job discrepancy is 8. It's 8, and you're going to have 15 jobs in the game. It's just the more jobs you release, the more bias there's going to be. So I get it. I respect that they are more focused on making the current healers and tanks more desirable, more fun, and that's a great goal to have. But I mean, this balance is not gonna be there if you keep introducing jobs. You're gonna just hear it more and more every expansion. It's just a matter of how seriously you take it, how much people actually care about what the min-maxers have to say versus how much they play with people who just accept that it's a job that they want to play. It all comes down to personal experience and what parts of the community you actually care about or listen to. He's also not concerned really about leveling because there's Deep Dungeons and Fates, which have both been incredibly popular for leveling, especially when they're fresh out of the expansion. Fates are always booming. So that he's not worried about. But, you know, he doesn't say there won't be a queue disparity. It's just that's not what their main concern is because they know that eventually tapers off. I did a leveling roulette today as Bard, 2.5 minutes. I was in shock. When this comes out, though, 2.5 hours might be more accurate. Moving on to the last question on page 1, he asked about adding jobs, or Twinfinite asked about adding jobs between expansions. Yoshi-P said, that's really tough. Ninja was a special case because Ninja was actually planned for the launch of A Realm Reborn and didn't make it, which we've heard before. So they knew they wanted to do it, and it was super stressful adding it. So going forward, it makes the most sense because they want to do an expansion every other year to just add new jobs because you either add them at exactly the halfway point or it's not worth adding them. You know, you don't want to add them to 2/3 through or 1/3 through. You want it exactly in the middle. Or it just makes more sense to release it every expansion. They might physically die, he says, if they have to release, you know, jobs yearly as opposed to bi-yearly. Now, page 2 is where some of the more interesting things, some of the bigger things that caught my attention with this interview happen. It talks about Stormblood, Endgame, housing, and more. So, let's be clear about something real quick. Gear in Final Fantasy XIV is not terribly elaborate. Critical hit rate, skill speed, or spell speed, accuracy, and determination are the 4 big ones. Parry, that's funny. Anyway, parry is one that's also there. And accuracy may even be getting removed. So gear is not terribly complicated in this game. However, despite being a very linear system, I do agree, a lot of people are confused about the efficiency of each, which, by the way, and I don't know why I'm doing this, could probably be fixed by, I don't know, adding in how much effect each substat has. It's like a very JRPG thing to just give you this generic stat and not tell you how much it affects you, and you just have to like figure it out on your own. That's really where all the confusion is. Okay, I have 1200 crit. What does that mean? You know, I feel like that would not be a problem, and they wouldn't have to do what he's saying they're doing right now if it was just more visual. How much crit do I have? Exactly, percentage-wise. You know, how much damage am I getting an increase out of for my determination? And then you can do all the theory crafting, whatever, based on that. He's saying they actually want to streamline the stats even more because people seem to just be confused about stats and what their efficiency is. I'm telling you, that's because you don't tell them how much it affects stuff. You have to leave everything for us to figure out. Once again, he makes the terrible, terrible mistake of saying the animal weapon is the best weapon when a fair portion of those 280 weapons are better without even considering off stats. The healers can't roll accuracy, so they're not better necessarily. And the tank ones, if they just roll parry, even those aren't better. But all the DPS ones that have like +30 weapon damage and shit, those are better. Believe it or not. It's a much closer thing. So either he knows the calculations for these off stats way better than we do, and everything we know is wrong, or he needs to say this more within the context of, in terms of something you can work towards and it's achievable, it's the best weapon. Yes, you can get this RNG weapon with incredible stats that will outperform, but the anima weapon is like your strongest consistent weapon. He needs to fix his wording if that's what he's trying to say, because I don't 100% agree with what he's saying about the anima weapon when people compare it to the 280 weapon. He's like, no, the anima weapon's the best weapon. What are you guys talking about? Maybe we'll get 280 anima weapons. Who knows? Now, the next question is about endgame content. You know, when Heaven's Word first launched, same old A Realm Reborn grind. We eventually got Acropolis, Deep Dungeon, Diadem. I'm glad Lords of Verminion's not listed here. So then he asked, you know, what kind of content are we going to see to diversify stuff in Stormblood? And Yoshi-P mentioned this, I think, at first at the North American Fan Fest. There's a brand new type of content that he thinks has never been done before in MMOs, which blows my mind that he could possibly think he's that original of an idea, or the team has that original of an idea. That is a currently planned, that brand new, never before seen in any MMO content, although here it just is never before seen type content, which could mean in 14. 4.2, which is important because brand new content around 4.2 is when we get a new raid tier. Is it new content that everyone can participate in? I would assume so, because that's the weakest part of even numbered patches, is creating content that everybody feels like they can participate in. It's always new primal with the new difficulty, plus the raids are always the big focus. So having something like that would probably be a boon to them in this patch, something, you know, along the lines of a deep dungeon or an Acropolis, because clearly we're not talking about the new deep dungeon. It's a brand new type of content. So interested to see. And also revealed that in 4.0 they're planning to update the Acropolis because it's content that has been generally successful in Final Fantasy XIV, and I think that's a right thing. Once they've given all their current content structure the right treatment, by 4.2 we'll have a brand new piece of endgame content. So we'll just have to wait and see what it actually is. As for the housing areas, Twinfinite asked the question I think we all had. What happened to Ishgard housing, bro? And he just said that it made more sense to go, like, the new area has housing, because it's like, oh, we're going to all these new places, and I'm going back to Ishgard. Didn't seem to make sense, but he says, rather than do an Alamigo one going forward, it seems the demand for Ishgard housing is high. So that may be the one that's next as opposed to Alamigan housing. So we'll see what happens. Finally, a question about colorblind mode. Now, these colorblind questions have been popping up a lot lately, but apparently they created a colorblind mode and just never released it. The system is in place, matter of graphical compatibility, and gotten to the point where they've tested it out. He says he actually had done a check on the machine, completed testing on it, 3 major type of color blindness, so you could switch to whichever one you had. And he actually thought it was implemented already at the Korean live letter at the South Korean event. He just said, someone said, oh, can we get a new colorblind mode? And he goes, there is a colorblind mode. And then staff came up to him and said, we never did that. And he was like, what? We never did that. So he looked kind of like I don't know what's going on. So yeah, colorblind mode probably going to happen sometime in the near future. And that's it for the Twinfinite interview. Overall, pretty decent interview. Some good questions, some answers we've heard before, but it was good. And I hope to see more from Twinfinite in the future. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for all the latest Final Fantasy XIV news, especially as we get closer and closer to Stormblood. Thank you for watching. Until next time, take care.